Okay, so one of the first videos I done for this YouTube channel was way back in December of 2014, and the video was about Shadow of Colossus, and the video title was how I felt that Shadow of Colossus may have inspired the work of Guillermo del Toro, and that was the title of the video. And I remember it was a lot of my own fan theories, and a lot of the theories didn't exactly work because I mean a lot of it was kind of false accusations, and it was just a theory that I developed myself. You know, there was a lot of passion when I made the video, but there was not a lot of logic kind of applied to the video at the same time. But I always wanted to do another video based on the concept of Shadow Colossus, and I'm glad to be able to do another video about it. And this video is going to be called "How to Approach a Shadow of the Colossus Movie." So I'm going to look at ways to approach the movie. And you may have noticed I've done a few videos like that where I kind of get cocky and say, hey, I know how to make a movie based on this video game, and I make an attempt and I make videos on it because that's what I do. And this is going to be another video in which I talk about how they should approach a Shadow of the Colossus movie. So before I get started, I'm going to say is that Hollywood has been trying to do this for quite a while now, and it's very interesting because I think there's been a few writers and directors attached to it, and I'm going to do a separate video about that, a development hell video all about that. And before I even get into that, I could just imagine, how a big Hollywood production version of this film would flow. And I'm going to tell you how Hollywood would approach this film. I'm going to set the scene for you guys. Can you imagine, right? A kind of a boardroom, real like long kind of narrow boardroom, and I imagine like a long table with a lot of men in suits sitting left to right to each other, slightly hunched over, laughing to themselves, cackling. A fireplace at the bottom of the room, whilst they burn fresh original scripts, whilst they're secretly planning to do a Back to the Future reboot with Justin Bieber as Marty McFly, and of course Melissa McCarthy as Dr. Emma Brown. Yep, it could happen because it's Hollywood, and it could become a reality. And if it does happen, I will definitely apologize. I will certainly apologize. I will send apology cards to anyone who wants a card. But I could imagine their vision for this film, and it's going to be horrible. I imagine them portraying the 16 Colossi as these absolute bastards, these bastard Colossi who just going around wrecking shit, and they're just like, oh, what the hell, Colossi, you're wrecking my shit. Oh, that's my freaking field, and you're wrecking it. Absolute assholes. And I imagine the Wanderer character is the people's champ, the hero of the village who must rise to defeat these 16 evil colossi, of course, because it's Hollywood, and these wonderful creatures have to be portrayed as evil. And of course, he's not the kind of youngish character that we know from the game. He's not that upcoming type character. He's this roided up looking character, similar to kind of an Arnold Schwarzenegger looking character, similar to how he looked in Conan. That's what's going to happen. He's just going to be massive. He's not going to even gallop on his horse. He's going to use his horse as a way of deadlifting. His love interest that we know from the video game is not going to be his love interest that he's trying to bring back from the dead. It's going to be a love interest played by, of course, Megan Fox. All the cleavage that could be summoned from Hollywood itself. And that's going to happen too. And of course, it's going to be directed or produced by Michael Bay. And it's going to have so much explosions. I mean, all the budget is just going to be explosions, and cleavage shots of biceps. Because that's how Hollywood will produce, how they'll create a Shadow of Colossus movie. And of course, instead of that incredible soundtrack that we know of in the video game that completely breaks our heart, it's going to be like a dubstep track going all the way through it. That's what it's going to be like. Or they'll do something like they've done for like Suicide Squad or Guardians of the Galaxy, where they'll throw in all these popular songs one after another. because that's what Hollywood's going to do. They're going to go by popular trends. You know, people like popular songs in movies. Let's do that for a Hollywood production. But let's look at how they should approach the Shadow Colossus game, and how they should make it as close to the game as possible. So I'm going to start it off. Okay, so first off, I think they should keep it really simple. Go back to the drawing board, and whatever ideas they have, completely wipe it off. As in, just have the game in front of them and just stare the hell out of it. Like, the story of the game is pretty simple. It's about, you know, a young man who's trying to bring his love back to life, and he's willing to go to great lengths to do this. And of course, these great lengths involve him killing 16 colossi, which are these giant titan-like creatures. So that's the story. And if they just keep it simple, that's simple. Like, don't add any pointless subplots, you know, that he worked in a Kmart, or he worked in a supermarket, you know, and, you know, he's met this love of his life, and his life has changed forever. Don't add that. Don't add any additional characters either. We don't want a Joan of Hill type character who's going to be add comic relief to the film. Don't add that either. Keep it personal. Keep the characters to as little as possible. I literally just think, like, for the game, for the most part, you don't really interact with any like other characters really. It's a man on his horse, and he talks to this almost invisible godlike entity. But that's really it. I mean, there's the characters in the game are very little, and it works. It works so well, but yet you're still passionate for the story, and you're still kind of driven to keep continuing on the game, because it's still a simple story, but so stylishly done. And that's what they need to do for this movie. Keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible. And just focus on just human gestures, good, simple acting with motion, and acting with actual physical acting, body language type acting. Focus on writing dialogue that's excellent and good, dialogue that's only used in small amounts but is still memorable and still iconic. That's what they need to do with this game. They really need to keep it small, but keep it iconic and keep it memorable. Okay, another thing they need to do is respect the Colossi. Once again, we know in Hollywood productions, we just see like Titan-like creatures as evil, you know. And the thing about the Colossi is they're not actually evil at all. Like, certain times they'll attack you, other times they won't. You know, if you were a Titan-like creature and you seen a guy trying to stab you in the back, I mean, you would feel like shaking him off, or, you know, grabbing him off your back. It's a thing you would do. I mean, you wouldn't let this little guy stab you in the head a few times. No, you wouldn't. But, you know, a Colossi does that in the game. You know, they get annoyed, they get distracted by the Wanderer. And that's what happens. They're not portrayed as evil characters. Some of them will attack you, you know, straight on, but others, they won't actually do that. So the Colossi should never be portrayed as evil characters, because they're not evil characters. They should be portrayed as characters who are like kind of these wild, almost like extinct like creatures. That's what they should be portrayed as. They live their own lives, and they do their own thing. And of course, the Wanderer has to come in and just be this kind of bastard like character who's gonna come in and kind of stab him in the head, because that's what happens in the game. Every Colossi death should actually feel horrible. It should feel absolutely terrible. That sympathetic feeling where you're just like, oh my god, this is so tragic. Oh my god, it's the worst thing ever. Because that's what you feel like in the game. Whenever they do that, you're just like, this is the worst thing ever. I'm the worst person ever. That's what you feel like in the game. Well, if you're, you know, a person who feels bad for killing giant-like creatures, like I did. I'd like if they could do real locations as possible, as in just shoot in lots of landscape type scenarios, lots of landscape, and try and shoot as much as location as possible. And what they should do is do what Gareth Edwards done for Monster. He shot it all on location, and what he done is, in post-production, he added all these scenery he wanted, like mountains and little things like that. He added in post, and I think that's what they should do for this movie, as in shoot as much as possible on location, and then of course add in any little details you want to add in post, any little details that were actually in the games, like temples or, you know, little landmarks here and there, added in post. Because it's very possible to actually do this with some practical effects in some real locations. Of course, the Colossi will have to be done with CGI because they have a massive scale to them. Of course, they're Titan-like creatures, so that definitely needs to be intact. Okay, so I mentioned, I kind of joked around about dubstep, but in reality, these games, the music needs to be from the games, and because the music in the games, it does so much for the game. It does so much to the game. The music almost works as a character in the game because there's such an isolation to the game. There's such a quietness to the game. And that quietness and the isolation, the music is just amplified because of those factors. And the music is just wonderful. It's heart beating, it's intense, it's thrilling, but also it's just so sympathetic towards these colossi, because as soon as these colossi fall to their doom, to their demise, they have this wonderful, heartbreaking leitmotif, and these elements really need to be restored for the game. And the composer, of course, is Ko Kotone. Sorry for pronunciation, but that's the composer of the game. And this guy definitely needs to be composing the movie because he's one talented guy. Okay, so I'm going to move on from that because I've made those points, and I want to say that this movie does not have to be live action. It doesn't have to be live action. Now, Hollywood are thinking, this needs to be live action, it's going to be awesome because we'll be able to make these big creatures on screen and people love big creatures on screen. The thing is, this film could work as a CG movie, it could work as an animation, and it could work as a stop motion animation. And I feel that with animation they can do so much more than live action can do, because what you draw on paper, what you storyboard on paper, that can often work so much better on animation and on stop motion type animation than something like a live action. And plus, I mean, there is such a restriction to budget in terms of a live action. I imagine they would be cutting the edges a little bit when it comes to Shadow of Colossus. If they did do live action, I imagine they'd be a little more generic when it comes to the designs of the actual colossi. And I imagine with an animation or a stop motion animation, they could really go there. They could replicate all these amazing colossi because they can do this on a smaller budget. And of course, the style would be definitely more maintained because with live action, it doesn't exactly fare well. Another thing is actually getting the style of the game right. The style of the game is so unique. It has this kind of emptiness, but this quietness about it. It's not exactly, Asian, and it's not exactly European either. And of course, it's not like Americanized either. It has such a wonderful feel to it. And replicating that is very important, because that's what makes Shadow of Colossus so incredible. It's that its style is so unique. So I really think they need to go back to the basics and try to replicate the style as much as possible. Okay, let's move on from how to approach it, and let's just look at directors I feel would be good for the part. Now, this is just my opinion. I could be wrong. Maybe I am wrong, but let's just go. Let's just go for it. Okay, so my first choice is, believe it or not, is a Spanish director by the name of J.A. Majona, and he is a wonderful director who directed a film called The Orphanage, and that film is absolutely fantastic. It's got such a unique style to it. It's a great story to it, and it's this type of movie that really plays into the soundtrack and really plays into music. And of course, it's got a likable lead character. And it's just a wonderful film that's got a mixture of horror, it's got a mixture of thrill, it's got a mixture of almost heartbreaking moments as well. All the elements that's needed for Shadow of Colossus. So he's doing a film this year called A Monster's Calls, and that film looks incredible. It's once again, he's combining live action with CG. And of course, there's this tree-like creature, and it looks fantastic, and it's Titan-like size, exactly like kind of Colossi. And just from the trailers, you can tell that it's going to be an absolutely heartbreaking story. And it's so interesting because if he can replicate that style, that emotion in A Monster's Calls, and if he could use that in Shadow Colossus, we could be in for an absolute winner because that film looks incredible. The Orphanage is such a good movie. It's definitely a film you definitely need to check out. One of the obvious choices of a director would be Guillermo del Toro. And of course, he's a director who's got a fantastic level of style to him. He's one of the most stylish directors in Hollywood, and I've been a massive follower of his work for years now. I try to watch as much of his films as possible, and I try to follow all the films that he's produced or he's involved with, and I love his style, and I think his style it would work perfectly because he's a director who's worked with practical effects. He's worked with big CG features. I mean, he's done Pacific Rim, of course, which had these Titan-like creatures in it, and of course each of those creatures looked incredible. And of course, he's the type of director who can really add a lot of heart to a film. Just watch Pan's Labyrinth. That film is incredibly heartbreaking. And of course, one of the big reasons why he should be considered is because Shadow Colossus is one of his favourite games of all time. So he's a fan. He loves the game. That means he'll put his heart and soul into this if he was director. Okay, so I mentioned stop motion earlier. And I think if they're going to a stop motion route, I think they should go for the king of stop motion. And that, of course, is Henry Selick. And Henry Selick, of course, done Nightmare Before Christmas. He done James and the Giant Peach. And, of course, he also done Coraline. And each of those films are incredibly stylish. And they've got a wonderful art direction. And, of course, they have such a unique style for each of their character designs. All these elements are great for Shadow Colossus. And once again, he's a director who can put so much heart into his production. And that's one of the one things that Shadow Colossus needs, heart. And I've mentioned that so many times in this video, but it's important to be mentioned. Now, this director, you guys might be familiar with. And it's kind of a director that's kind of out of the blue for me, out of the bag in terms of choices. And it's a young director who landed his directorial debut last year with a film called Slow West, and he's director by the name of John McLean. And the one reason why I think he'd be a good director for this is because he's the type of director who can work with a smaller budget but still create a film with a great sense of journey, a great sense of character, and a great sense of destination, which is absolutely wonderful for a director. And the themes of Slow West and the themes of Shadow Colossus are pretty interesting. The idea of a young man on this coming of age type story, or a story of great lengths to find his love or save his love, and that's seen in both Shadow Colossus and of course Slow West. The thing with Slow West which worked as well is the script was to a minimum, and of course once again it didn't have a lot of cast either. There wasn't a lot of cast members. And that's what made it work so well. And that's why I think he'd be a great choice for director. And once again, with Hollywood productions, there's often cases where they go for directors who are slightly unknown. And that's a new common trend these days. And that's working quite well, actually. And John McClane is a director he's not everyone's pick for this. And that's why I think he'd be a great director for this. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap this up. You know what my approach for this film is, but I'll summarize it again for the sake of the video. Okay, first off, keep the story simple. Don't add to the story, just follow it as much as possible. Keep the isolation of the story, keep the direction of the story, keep the destination of the story, keep the journey and the atmosphere and the scale of the story. Keep all that intact. Respect the hell out of the Colossi. Don't add to them, don't touch them. Keep their designs faithful. Portray them as kind of neutral characters. Don't make them these evil characters that we've seen so many times in Hollywood production. Keep them as these wonderful and innocent-like creatures. Try and use as much relocations as possible, and add in features afterwards in post-production. Keep the music from the actual game, and be more creative with the film. It doesn't have to be a live-action film. It can be a CG film. It can be a stop-motion film. Keep your options as open as possible. And I'm going to just wrap this up. I'm going to just say, what do you think of the idea of a Shadow Colossus movie? What do you think of my approach, my vision for a Shadow Colossus movie? Am I right? Am I wrong? And do you still want to see this a movie? And have you actually played the Shadow of Colossus games, and what's your opinion on that game? And I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you for watching.